Hey there, welcome back to the Uncovered Dish Christian Leadership Podcast, the podcast that uncovers stories, equips leaders, and changes the world. And we are your hosts, James Lee
and Gabby Corbett. And today, our guest is Andrew Ryoo. And Andrew Ryoo is a former GNJ local pastor. Andrew has since moved on to work in advertising and technology, working for global brands such as Warner Media, Publicis, and Oracle. Today, Andrew joins the podcast as treasurer on the board of My Sanctuary Healing, Inc., a 501c3 nonprofit organization dedicated to restoring lives impacted by spiritual abuse and trauma within American Christian churches. Welcome, Andrew. We're so glad you're here today.
Thanks, Gabby. Happy to be here.
So, Andrew, it's been a while since we've actually talked. So I'm so glad that we could connect
I know.
And have this podcast as an excuse to catch up. But have you been? What's going on in your life?
Oh, well, on the surface, same old, but a lot of stuff in the works. Just to rewind a couple of steps back for your listeners, James and I go way back. We went to college together at Rutgers. He was too cool to hang out with me regularly, but I try my best.
Completely the other way around.
Yeah. Okay. So that's debatable, but but anyway, again, really glad to be here. Grateful to be here. Thank you for offering me the space to share about some of the stuff that's been happening. So to sort of talk about what's in the present, as you mentioned. I am currently on the board of My Sanctuary Healing, which is a fledgling nonprofit that I was really lucky to be one of the founding board members of. The goal of the organization is to, help people rebuild their lives after experiencing spiritual and religious trauma within, specifically within the walls of the American church. So, that's just where we're starting, not out of anything specific. We just see that need in our personal lives and in our local community. So that's where we're starting. And I think, one of the things that differentiates our approach is that we are from the get-go. We have clinical practitioners and licensed social workers on our staff and on our board. One of them also happens to be an ordained minister in the Reformed Church of America. So we have these resources that we're really excited to share with not only those who are impacted by spiritual trauma in their own lives and trying to pick the pieces back up, but also to churches. So, I know a couple of episodes back, I was listening to the podcast, and Gabby, you were talking about safe sanctuaries. That's exactly the type of things that we want to be able to help, underpin with resources, with substance. And not only that, but, prevent this really, really horrible thing from happening to people that not only robs them of their faith, it sometimes robs them of their finances, their family, their social circles, their mental well-being, so many things that we store within the walls of the church for ourselves.
Yeah. Andrew, I know many of our listeners are from Greater New Jersey in the United Methodist Church, and many folks know you either as the video person. I still get called Andrew from now and then because I've since become the video person after you. And also as a church planter and a person that was leading a very exciting ministry for a lot of folks. And then, at least for some folks, they felt like you kind of disappeared, right?
Sure.
I know there's a lot that happened there. Just however much you feel comfortable sharing, just let our folks know sort of your spiritual journey and where you are now, where you are not you're not serving in ministry as a pastor currently.
Sure. Yeah. No, thank you, James. So just to fast forward, I know everyone's gonna start falling asleep when I say starting with my childhood, but I'll try to zip through it as fast as possible. So I grew up in the United Methodist Church, Korean United Methodist Church in northern New Jersey. It was my life. I loved it. Great experience. I was really, really active in youth group, really, really active in anything young adult, that the denomination would throw at us. I went to these awesome trips in Russia, with the conference and all these things. going into college, like a lot of us, I'm a pastor's kid as well. So, we want to kind of bust out and, do things that we feel like we couldn't do. So, I did some of that. Along the way, I did feel a calling back to ministry. Around, I think, like my junior year in college, I was yanked back, and you know, but in a different way. It was really interesting because my faith, the faith that formed within me in college, was different than my heritage faith. Right. The first organizations that spoke to me about Jesus in college was Campus Crusade. And this really conservative, orthodox, not really orthodox, but pretty orthodox, community of young adults under the Christian Reformed Church. So, like, not to villainize or anything like that, but these are flavors of the faith that are a little stricter, rigid, right, and demand a more stringent lifestyle. So that was attractive to me. It was a faith that called my old faith, like milk toast. Like you're doing it halfway. Why don't you do it all the way now? I'm sure that you guys hear this, and like your ecumenical groups and stuff, like it's not like we're the most hardcore group of people. But that being said, that was what attracted me to it. So that's what my my ministry and my idea of ministry, the expectations of myself and from other people, all of that was sort of crafted within that context.
Wow,
So
wow.
yeah, so it was pretty interesting, coming out of college. We didn't get, we weren't released into the hottest job market. It was like 2010, and it was a lot like right now. Houses don't make sense, prices don't make sense, so it was like that. And I was aimless for a little while, and people from the UMC, I just started talking to them, and a lot of people gave me tons of opportunities, once in a lifetime opportunities, the ability to interview people who were impacted by Hurricane Sandy, to be able to be one of the founding people to try out Mosaic Ministries, like, and these are, just really wonderful friendships, wonderful experiences. So coming out of that, I was like, okay, I want to plant my own church. I want to try it out. I cut my teeth, and now I want to sink into something. I want to do something. So I partnered with a pastor that was a little bit older than I was, and we ventured off. And this was my first time sort of leaving the itinerant system in my years of ministry, kind of going out and doing it on my own, or what I thought was, I was trying to shape as my own. So after that happened, something that immediately occurred was that my finances became really shaky. One of the reasons is because, obviously, in order to take this leap, I did take a practical pay cut, and I measured, and I was like, you know what, this is a hit that I could take. But coming out of it, all of a sudden, I wasn't really protected by any kind of like, ecumenical structure, or not ecumenical, but like, like organizational structure.
Like a denominational connectional structure. Right.
Sure. So what, and I was like in my late 20s, so I still didn't really know how, like, well, that's not an excuse, but I didn't really know how money worked that well. Anyway, but I still don't know how money works that well. So, whatever. But I started, my partner in ministry started yanking and pulling and pushing my salary around. So every month I could be making $2,000, or I could be making $600. I don't know, right? It really was dependent on that person's needs. So that person was like, hey, church is having a hard time. I'm having a hard time. You're single and whatever. So you're the one who's going to take the smallest hits. So we're going to take a $400 haircut off of your salary this month. So that became a problem because I was also renting out an apartment that was $750 a month. So the math just doesn't really add up. Insult to injury, we were holding church services at the apartment that I couldn't afford. So it was like if I think back, I'm like, oh man, like, how did I put myself in that situation? Nevertheless, it happened. That happened for a while, and along the way, a friend sat me down, and the conversation started with, Andrew, your skin looks terrible. And I was like, oh, thanks a lot. Good to see you too. But this friend was someone that I served with in ministry a long time ago, since left the church and stopped going. But when I was experiencing maybe like just ignorance and people didn't want to care, they want to look the other way, people weren't really wanting to invest in my pain in the church, this guy who hasn't been going to church, who doesn't really adhere to the faith, who doesn't really care about being Christ-like, comes to me and becomes Christ. He's like, you deserve more than this. You're hurting. You're in pain. You're unhealthy. He said, there's a job out there for you in my industry that I feel like you can kill it in. And he trained me. He took time out of his day to train me. I think back to that now, and that's so crazy to me. Who comes back from work at 6:00 in the evening and stays with his friend in like a crummy apartment till 9 p.m. teaching them about technology? That's what he did. And I interviewed. He stuck his neck out for me. His friend was a VP at the time at a company. I got my first corporate ladder job at 28. And that day I called that partner and I was like, I'm done. And I walked out forever. And that was a long time ago. And for the next 6 years, I was really, really angry and really, really frustrated at everything. When these experiences happen within the church, and I know that as practitioners and as like pastors, I've been in that boat before, and a lot of times it feels so unfair that these traumas that are being these experiences that are happening between individuals, between groups, how can they blame the church? How can they blame God? But that's what happens when that anger festers, and when you let it just like sit on its own, the hatred it spreads to everything, and it spreads to God too. It's my whole thing. The thing that I struggled with for the past 6 years after that was God, how could you call me and then just turn around and walk away like that? There was a point when I told my partner in ministry that I was food insecure, and he dropped off a bag of canned goods, didn't call, didn't ring my doorbell, and just walked away. How could you call me? And this is your response to my need, So I was so angry, but it's not zooming out, right? It wasn't about all of that. It was just this one guy who, whatever, that's his whole prerogative. But it wasn't God doing that to me or anything like that. But that's what it became. I festered in it for 6 years until it started spreading into parts of my life that are really sacred to me, like my marriage and my family. Like hate is something that just pushes through all the barriers and compartments in your life. And at that point, I was like, I can't do this anymore. It's too tiring. It's too exhausting. I need help. So I sought therapy. It took a couple of tries, but eventually I found this practitioner who used to be ordained or is ordained, but not actively serving in a mainline denomination, who also happened to be a licensed social worker and a clinical therapist. So I was like, okay, this is an obvious home run. So I started, meeting her. And then along the way, ran into some folks who are part of her support groups or part of her clientele that are also experiencing trauma from their church experiences, and specifically trying to move forward from it in faith. There are a lot of people who are just like, okay, I experienced this, I'm done with the whole thing, baby, bathwater, house, goodbye, But I didn't know that there were these people that are so desperately seeking their way back to some semblance of faith. And I was just so blown away by the beauty of the conversations in the community there. I've never seen a community that is so starkly, so rawly just wanting Jesus.
Yeah.
Like, how crazy is that, right? Like it's like something I dreamed about every day as a minister. You go to the pulpit and people are literally clawing at you because they want to feel hope again. And they want to hear the truth again. And they want it to be relevant to them again. It's like, it was the most inspiring thing I've ever seen. And I almost wanted to have like my stole on again, because that's how, I mean, like it would be such a home run, but here I am. I don't have one. I don't, I'm not part of the system anymore. So what can I do? I asked that question, and that's kind of how we tripped and fell into My Sanctuary Healing. It's a 501c3 that, I mean, we're not rolling in the dough. And most importantly, we're not approaching this thing first from that place. Where we're at right now is, we just want to hear, we just want to listen. You know, we want to listen to the stories from the ground of people who are victims of abuse. Also from people who are leading churches who are really like, you know, struggling right now and confused because they see this deconstruction stuff happening. They see a lot of people walking out of the church, a lot of sad things, you know, a lot of their colleagues walking out of the church, and they're like, what is going on? You know, what more could I possibly do?
Yeah.
We want to listen. And we want to, from there, from listening to both sides, build paths towards holistic healing, right? Lord knows, it's not only the individuals that need it right now, our churches need it desperately too.
Yeah. Andrew, thank you so much for sharing that. And when's the last time you shared that story with somebody?
You know, it's funny. I share it almost every week now. So every Wednesday, My Sanctuary Healing hosts a Zoom meeting online where people from coast to coast. I mean, we recently invited someone from California, and she comes on. We meet, and it's like a support group. We talk a little bit about the harm that we experienced. We speak truth and life into each other's lives, and try to figure out a way out of it. And it's in this group that I share my story almost every week, because not because it's like an awesome story or whatever, but I found that it makes people feel uncrazy. You know, when they come on and they're like, this church like beat me up and I feel terrible, and they kicked me out and I don't know who I am. When I say my story and I say I was a pastor and that happened to me too, people feel uncrazy. And if that's all the power that story has, I would love to exhaust it for all it's worth, because that's a wonderful thing.
There's a thing that pops up on Facebook fairly often, and I reshare it every time, that says that shame dies when stories are told in safe places.
Right.
And
I love that.
Right. And I think that is what the church should be in general. Right. Would the church should be a safe place in which shame dies? Because I think that, you know, I've been in ministry for a long time, and I've served in a lot of different places and in a lot of different contexts. And it's, the abuse is there left and right. And, you know, especially now, as more and more people are finding their brave spaces to be able to share their narratives and feel like they're not the only person who's ever experienced this before, the more that we get to kind of say, okay, how do we approach this? How do we hear these stories and say, we have to do something about this if we want the church to survive? And I don't mean a denominational structure or a building or anything other than the community that Jesus calls us to be a part of. Right. And it sounds like that's really a lot of the work that you guys are doing with My Sanctuary Healing. Religious trauma is so prevalent in 1,000 different ways. I was just interviewed a couple weeks ago for somebody's doctoral research on young clergy women. And the way that she framed out the questions is, what advice have you been given by people either in congregations or district superintendents? She happens to come from a Methodist point of view, or the structures about how to survive in ministry. And sitting down and sort of recounting some of the stories of, you know, somebody told me that they would no longer receive communion from me because I wore pants.
Oh man.
Right. Like somehow wearing pants
destroys the whole
destroys
mystery.
the sacrament.
Yeah,
right?
it's done. Yeah,
It's just done. And when that
Oh
person
my goodness.
left the church, she started worshiping in another community. And I texted the pastor and I was like, hey, just so you know, like, here's the deal. And his comment back to me was, do you think I should wear a skirt the first time I serve communion? Like, you know, because right, this person would take communion for me wearing pants.
Sure.
And it's right, a very small narrative of all of the different things. But where do we give folks space to be able to talk about this? And not just in a, let's talk about all of the horrible things that we've experienced in ministry, but what do we do about it?
Right.
And how do we help people who have been so harmed by the church find Jesus again? Because, right, Jesus is not, we have, I think, created this narrative that Jesus is the church. Right. And Jesus is not, we all know that Jesus is not the church. So how do you help people find Jesus again? So I'm interested to kind of know, what has your reconstructing of your own faith journey been like in this process?
Yeah. Big question. Yeah. Thank you for asking that. No, seriously, I think it's a big question because that's like the real unknown, right? And I think that that's the scariest thing around deconstruction when like pastors and church leaders talk about it, because you don't know how it's going to end. The way it ended for me is that I feel like today the faith that I have is enriched by my experiences. Not, it doesn't explain my experiences, but I feel like my calling has been rewired and repurposed, and I feel like I feel really close to. Yeah, I just feel really close to Jesus when I sort of write down on paper what God's put in front of me, you know, which is a group of people who are, you know, who are, for whatever reason, in a religious setting, they have been persecuted and they just earnestly want to find some truth. And I feel like that's describes a lot of people Jesus spoke to as well back in his day. I think, you know, for me, I when I think about the word deconstruction, I sort of like wrinkle my nose at it because it's a little bit Oppenheimer-y.
Well, what's wrong with Oppenheimer? I love that movie.
But it is about the destruction of all things. So, you know, like.
Well, I was going to say, Andrew, in a previous conversation, you did say that you prefer the term renegotiation versus deconstruction. So what's the difference there? And kind of let us know, what does it mean to renegotiate your faith as opposed to deconstruct?
Sure. Yeah. So, you know, when I think about deconstruction first, I think about, do you guys remember the show Scrubs? About doctors? Yeah. Okay, cool. So, Scrubs. There's this one episode that I really love that I really resonated with as a minister, which was this episode where their chief of medicine bemoans that nobody respects him anymore as a doctor. So there's this flashback where he went to a barber shop and they gave him a haircut for free because he was wearing his white coat. And the context of that episode is that he's sitting with a patient and all she's doing while he's giving her advice is just looking at her phone and just telling him how his advice is wrong, right? Looking at WebMD. That's where we live today, y'all.
Yeah,
you know, like
there's a lot of parallels there.
Information is democratized, you know, like everything is democratized, you know, and we live in a world where deconstruction is so easy. You can just deconstruct anything. But, you know, and you can deconstruct to destroy, you can deconstruct to appreciate, you can deconstruct to do all sorts of things. I think for me, what I found to be really healing was not objectively, that's kind of like an incorrect word, but studying what I already knew from different perspectives.
Yeah.
I remember my first class I drew was Old Testament, and the adjunct professor, like the first thing that she said was like, "This class is going to break your faith," and that is, I wonder why that is only taught in seminary. Like, this information is not only stored in seminary libraries anymore. It's democratized. There's a lot of context. There are a lot of different ways to interpret things. There are a lot of things that are the opposite of each other in our holy scriptures. What does this mean? Right?
Mhm.
Like, does it negate our faith or does it enrich our faith? Does it tell us more about God or less about God? And like, I feel like too often the answers were too easy in my life. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, you read this, that is wrong. You read this about the Bible, it's wrong. No, you got to go back to Strong's and look at the Hebrew word for this, and that will validate everything. It's just after a while that excuse gets really, really just dry and not true. It's not accurate. So yeah, I found my faith to be renegotiated through knowledge, and through just in frustration looking for more, and somehow finding more. Like, for example, and you guys can cut this out if you want, but like, one of the things that I've been thinking about is how the Book of Esther, right? Like, Esther as a historical figure is probably not very likely. I mean, it's like a pretty outrageous situation. That being said, does it tell us a lot about God and
Mhm.
how God thinks about his people, right? And particularly how God moves in situations? Yeah. And does that enrich my faith or does it destroy my faith? I feel like it enriches mine. So that's just kind of like my perspective. Um, the group that we hold at My Sanctuary Healing, a lot of what we talk about is around that kind of theme. It's
Mm.
about how to renegotiate the things that happen to you. How do you renegotiate all the information in the world? And these
Yeah.
days, how do you renegotiate the hate that you see, coming out of a lot of mainstream representations of faith
Yeah.
with your own faith and with your understanding of who Jesus is and how the church moves? It's pretty tough. So it's something that we find requires conversation and constant vigilance and back and forth.
Yeah. So I have known that I wanted to be in ministry since I was 4. Right.
Yo,
I
that's
was one of those,
awesome.
right. I was one of those kids. And it is interesting, the renegotiating that I've done in my lifetime too. But when I was getting ready to go to college, right, you have the options before you. This is the scary time of your life where you now have to make a decision about how the rest of your life is going to
Right.
go.
This is it.
Right,
Yeah.
right. This is it. You're going to make a decision now, and it is going to change the trajectory of the rest of your life. Right. That's what they make you believe.
Mm-hmm.
But I wound up going to a very, very secular school. So I graduated from Smith College in Northampton, Massachusetts, and I was a religion major. And I remember going to my very first Bible class. Right now, I graduated from high school in 2010. I am a baby, and walking onto campus, right? And I grew up in the church. I am a cradle Methodist. And sitting down in that very first class where my professor was not a Christian man, right? He was a Jewish man who's an incredible scholar and an incredible teacher, and proceeded to deconstruct everything I thought I knew, right? About
Yeah.
literally deconstruct. Like, the first time somebody said, Noah's Ark didn't happen that way.
It was
like,
not a bunch of animals,
Right.
peering out the dock with smiles while there's a rainbow
Right.
in the back. No.
Right.
But
Yeah.
and
A
that
lot
it didn't
more.
happen even according to the way scripture portrays it.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's
Right.
not like the dinosaurs missed the boat, literally.
Right. Right. It's like there's so much more there. And I remember it was a women's college, and of the students that I started with, almost all of us who started in religion were faith-based folks. And by the time we graduated, there were only 2 of us who still had any sort of faith left, right? Because we've never been given permission or space or tools to understand how we can take all of the things that we learned in Sunday school and apply them to this chapter in our lives.
Right.
And so, right, so that makes it hard to navigate what we do next. So, what advice would you give to us who are like, if you like a really quick, like, if you do nothing else, if you're still in ministry, do this to
Mm-hmm.
help people navigate their own stuff in
Mm-hmm.
ministry? What would your like 2 to 3 sentences of here's what you should start doing?
Okay. Yeah, I got this. Write a list of the top 5 communities or people that make you the most uncomfortable, and then go there.
Mm,
It's so easy. I find that the most healing or most impactful thing for people who have experienced spiritual trauma or are struggling with just the whole idea in general is to stick themselves into a different tradition,
mm,
whether it's a different expression of Jesus or something that's entirely out on its own. If you do that, a lot of things come into context and
yeah.
you realize, oh, this whole thing is a lot bigger than like the cross in flames, my little church, my family. It's a lot bigger than this, and it's a really cool experience.
Mm.
Mm-hmm.
That's
Yeah,
excellent
awesome.
advice.
And another layer to the renegotiation of faith that I keep hearing, and I just want to pinpoint on, is the importance of a community to renegotiate that faith with.
Oh,
So
100%.
I think from spiritual trauma, you know, oftentimes we are getting disconnected from a community that we associated with. And that is very isolating. And sure, that leads to deconstruction that can be healthy, but it also, through isolation, it's very easy for, like you had mentioned early on, for the hate and the anger to fester. And how important it is to have a community like that you talk about in My Sanctuary Healing, where you're able to have those conversations openly and therefore, uh, you know, just get rid of the shame that may be associated with it and renegotiate the faith in a way that is constructive and creative and hopefully life-giving. So, yeah, I would just add just the importance of not renegotiating that faith alone, but really doing it in community where you are safe. I know
100%.
that's Yeah, I know that's hard to
Another
find,
thing that I
but
hear you
creating
saying,
those
Andrew, that I think
spaces.
is really important is the time you take away.
Mm.
Mm,
It's okay to walk away.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
think that that's really important for people to hear in general, whether they're sitting in the pews and navigating what comes next or we're serving in ministry, that walking away doesn't equate that you'll be gone forever.
Mm.
And taking time to sort of process your stuff is really important.
yeah.
Right. I
Definitely.
think sometimes we want to shove ourselves back into like, oh, this church really hurt me. And so now this will always be my experience for the rest of my life. Or I'm going to, it's like when you're in about a chronic bad relationship person and you're like, well, this
Yeah.
next
A
relationship will
terrible
fix me.
relationship partner, and then you
Right.
rebound.
We're
Yeah.
not going to do, right? You don't need to rebound
Yeah.
churches.
Don't rebound too fast. Just take some time alone. That is true. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Take some time to
Yeah,
figure your
yeah.
stuff out. I think that that's
Mm,
hugely important too, is, giving yourself the grace and the space to be able to say, I can walk away and that there is a life outside of this. And
Yeah.
I will find my way back in maybe a different way. But yeah, God will
awesome.
make a way where there seems like there's no way.
It's
Amen.
crazy how that happens. It's pretty unreal. And yeah, no, I agree with both of you. One slight asterisk is when you're engaging online, just kind of like be careful because like I feel like oftentimes because there are not many communities where you can have these conversations, people go online. And I have found some really wonderful communities online. The thing is that it's just a lot less safe. Like you just don't know what's going to
Mm.
happen, what someone's going to post, how that's going to affect you. Um, Also, there's just that less care for each other in an online setting where everyone's anonymous. So you can't really think that that person who's saying this thing is really thinking about you and saying it, right? So just be mindful if you're on that journey. If you're having trouble finding people, I'm certainly happy to be a resource and try to navigate you to a community that can sort of talk to you. But yeah, the online stuff sometimes is gets a little tricky.
Yeah. So, Andrew, thank you again so much for coming on the podcast. I know we could talk forever about this, but I'm hoping that some of our listeners who are struggling or feeling alone would be able to find that community. And perhaps My Sanctuary Healing could be that community. So, if there was some of our listeners who wanted to find out more about it, where can they go to get that information?
Yeah. So, our website is in progress. I am not the director of communications there, unfortunately, but our website is in progress. I'm just playing. The website would never come out if I was. The website is in progress. So, in the meantime, if you are somebody who is resonating with this story, wants to learn more, or just wants to sort of just bounce stuff off of me or my community, or just want to get some more information, please email me, treasurer@mysanctuaryhealing.org. Or you can hit me up on my personal email, roo.andrew@gmail.com. It's ryoo.andrew@gmail.com. And we can talk it out and have good conversations.
Awesome. Thank you, Andrew. Before we let you go, there is one last question that we ask all of our guests, and I'm going to let Gabby do the honors for that.
All right. So you have already shared that you are a PK, that you grew up in the Methodist denomination. So you know that we are obsessed with our potlucks. That's why we are the Uncovered Dish podcast. Yes. So if you could only eat one thing for the rest of your life, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, what would it be and why?
What would it be and why? So I think my favorite food category is a sandwich, and my favorite sandwich is a burger. And I just feel like there are a lot of ways that you could make permutations of it. So I would choose burger.
Pretty Excellent. Safe. I thought you were going to go with ribs. I was like, I thought you were going to say ribs, but burger.
I listened to this podcast, so I thought very hard about this before coming on.
We love a guest who does their research.
Thank you so much. I try my best.
Oh, wow. Well, once again, we had the conversation with Andrew Ryoo, and he is the treasurer of My Sanctuary Healing. We just had great conversations about healing, renegotiating your faith through difficult times of spiritual trauma. And if you'd like to find out more, as Andrew just shared, you could reach him at treasurer@mysanctuaryhealing.org or roo.andrew@gmail.com. Andrew, thanks again for coming on the podcast. We hope to hear from you soon. Let's talk more.
No, let's hang out. I mean, you know, Gabby, we gotta hang out soon. You know, I mean, we're local, so
over burgers and some ribs too.
Yeah, we learned that we're neighbors, so it's gonna be great.
I'll try to squeeze myself in between the two of you.
Fair enough. Piscataway's invited too. Right?
Yeah. All right. Take care, Andrew. We'll talk again.
All right. Thanks, guys.